Hello, 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 and welcome to the 11th episode of Mixed Media Reviews. My name is Kelsey, and today I'll be talking about a TV show. But there was sort of a change of plans. See, I just finished rewatching all of Dexter and got caught up on the latest Dexter New Blood series. So this week's TV show is going to be Dexter New Blood, with a hint of the original Dexter show, and certainly it will not be about Avatar: The Last Airbender. So, apologies, but I needed this. I was a little late to the original Dexter train. I started watching it during, I think it was season 6, because I binged the first 5 seasons in a week, back when I had insomnia issues, and then I watched it as it aired, so I'm pretty sure season 5 had just ended, or maybe it was in the middle of season 6, can't remember. But I had mixed feelings about the show, like probably everyone did. I strongly disliked the series finale, but I think the last season or so, it started with some odd storylines that I wasn't quite sure of as well. I know a lot of people say after season 4, after the Trinity Killer, it really goes downhill, but after a rewatch, I don't think that really happens until maybe season 7. I think it's when, also this is going to be super spoiler heavy, so warning. I think it's after season 7 when Deb finds out that Dexter is a serial killer. I think that's really when things start to take a turn, with little bits here and there before then. I hadn't heard really much or anything about Dexter New Blood. I started watching it while it was still airing, and the only thing I really heard was that it was pretty good so far, and that was about it. Once again, this is going to be a super heavy spoiler episode because I can't stop myself, hence why this jumped the queue. I have to talk about it, and this is going to be a ridiculously long episode of me just ranting a lot, so my bad. Also, I'm sure you can hear construction outside, because there's always construction, because it never ends. Dexter New Blood picks up about 9 years after the events of the series finale of the original Dexter. And in case you need a refresher, Dexter, at the end of Dexter, rides his boat into a hurricane after his sister, Deb, dies from the main killer for the season. We see his boat is broken up the next morning, but then it cuts to Dexter in a cold region with a logging truck. I have my own issues with the series finale, but this episode isn't really about that, so right now I'll just move on. New Blood is then 9 years later in a fictional small town in upstate New York called Iron Lake. Dexter has found his new normal in the small town, even dating the chief of police. But he's still in love with the quiet and has made a home in an isolated cabin in the woods where he spends his time alone. Until one day he realizes he isn't alone. Someone out there is watching him. His son, Harrison, has found him. So what did I like about this show? Well, I liked almost every single episode. I thought with the original ending that they gave us, this was the best way to begin. Dexter isn't killing anymore. He found some kind of peace. He lives in this small, quaint town where he works at a local sporting/hunting goods store. He doesn't get involved in cases. He isn't around blood. He's in a small town where virtually no crime exists. I liked the whole chasing the white deer with a gun but not shooting it thing. It was like his way of testing those urges and being able to keep them at bay. And more than that, I think everything Dexter did was a way for him to be free of those urges, of his dark passenger. He went to a very cold location, the opposite of Miami. He gets a new name, which is a nice nod to the writer of the book, Jeff Lindsay, or books, I should say. And he even has a job that isn't law enforcement or anything that really has to do with human life or death. I also really liked the diversity of the cast. I feel like for a long time, TVs and movies and other media types thought that diversity meant we'll have white people and then throw in an occasional black person, and that'll make everything better. But I feel like now we're genuinely getting some diversity. Is most of the cast still white? Sure. But it feels authentic in a way. They had characters that made sense in a small town, including being close to tribal land. I liked the addition of the Seneca Nation and how they really tied that in with the overall story of the missing girls and didn't just say, let's have them for diversity's sake. They also had a happily married gay couple, a woman in a wheelchair, and other characters that made the town feel more real. While I missed the title sequence from the original Dexter, I did like the icy title with blood, and that the title of each episode was written in the environment. A bit of a step up from the old titles, which were just a black screen with, I want to say, yellow lettering across it. And also, I think that's my favorite way of displaying text for TV and movies, is when it's like in the environment, and it can be something that reacts with something physical in the show or movie, like a truck blowing it away with the snow. I always think they're pretty cool. Probably one of my favorite things about where we find Dexter is that Deb is his new hallucinated person that he listens to. Before, it was Harry, which I think, and I probably is just what everybody thinks, is his conscience. Someone to help him be strict with the code, someone to help him blend in. It was his guiding light, and on numerous occasions we saw that it was really an extension of himself, something he used to help guide him, and something that he sometimes fought against, like everybody else's kind of conscience. It was thinking the worst about himself while also striving to be better. Follow the code and you won't disappoint your loved ones. Follow the code and you can have a family. Fight against the code, and of course, by extension, Harry and his conscience, then you will lose it all. Deb becoming his new conscience was to show how guilty he felt. Harry began to fail him in the end of the original Dexter because he started to realize that he didn't really need the code. He could be better on his own. That maybe Harry didn't do what was best for him. His faith in that, his father, and the code, it began to falter, and we saw him fight with Harry more and more often. And then Deb dies because he didn't follow the code, because he decides to let her bring him in. And also that he began to follow the code, he set it up and then switched gears at the last moment. And again, I have issues with how all of that played out. But at the end of the day / series, Deb dies and Dexter feels it's his fault. So much so that he believes that he's not good for anyone, that death will follow him wherever he goes, which is something that repeatedly gets brought up in the series, but he feels it now more than ever. He takes Deb's body and dumps her in the ocean, a place where he feels most connected. Remember that in the beginning of Dexter, he talked about death being comforting and how it helped him feel connected, feel like himself. That was his favorite place to be, was out there on the water after he dumped the bodies. So then he drives out into the sea, and he leaves his son with another serial killer. I guess he thinks Harrison will be okay with one serial killer, but not him being the serial killer. Just the lady can be one. Which, I guess in grief, I suppose could be something he would think. So we'll let it slide for now. So when we see him again, of course he's not going to have Harry with him, but Deb. Someone he felt very connected to that he lost. Someone he believes his actions directly killed. And not in the same way as his father, because remember, his father died by suicide after seeing what Dexter had done, and he couldn't live with the man he created. But instead, Deb died as a result of him being who he was. Not following the code, but also by his life choices that led him there. That led Deb there, bringing her into his world. All of that killed Deb in his eyes. So of course she's his new conscience, and of course she's the part of him that constantly reminds him that death follows him. Her gunshot wound is pretty much always visible, especially when she's digging in. And she keeps telling him that nothing good can come from Harrison being there. And, spoiler alert, she was right. Overall, I was really enjoying the show, and I thought they did some pretty cool things. I liked the serial killer aspect with the runaways. I thought the cast was all great. I think the stories and how they all connected were great. Angela's best friend going missing ends up being murdered by the same guy who's responsible for all the missing women that she constantly is trying to fight to look for. And that ends up being his first kill. And when Molly appears among the other trophies, I was genuinely surprised. But then it immediately clicked on how she had been missing. And also, the reveal of what he was doing with those bodies was great. I had no idea what we were going to find down there, but was very pleased with what they did. And the way Dexter does serial killers, the show does serial killers, that is basically past trauma that reasserts itself, that was carried on with Kurt. We saw it in the song that he played, the way he was recreating that first kill, that he was trying to protect them from his dad. That's all very textbook Dexter serial killer build. I also thought they did a good job of recreating Dexter's world without basically all of the original cast. His voiceover, seeing Deb, what I mentioned about Kurt, Dexter always talking about maintaining his cover, and even the addition of Harrison on the list of people Dexter tries to team up with and finds out about him. Because that happened almost every single season, beginning with Miguel in season 3, and the hints before that with his brother Brian and that dumb NA sponsor woman who I won't even bother looking up her name because I hated her. And I'm realizing this will probably be the first time where my sponsor ad actually kind of follows well, but now I'm ruining it by saying this instead of immediately having follow me talk about that sponsor lady. So enjoy. Okay, so I just took a sip of Gatorade to prepare myself for the length that is about to happen of me talking. What I didn't like about Dexter. I'm really bummed that this section is going to be so long because I was really enjoying this show. And while there were things that I was a little iffy about, basically all of the iffiness stemmed from the original ending of Dexter. So they didn't have much choice but to continue what they did. Most of my upcoming critiques will be in, I'm pretty sure, just like the last episode, a little bit before that as well, but pretty much all just the last episode. This is probably the only time in history, and probably true for every single person who watched it, that I would have been completely fine if they just decided that this was all a hallucination of Dexter's and that the last episode didn't happen the way it did. Totally cool. I feel like it's almost a Game of Thrones situation where I'm not exactly upset about how it ended, like where it ends up and where the characters end up, but the events that led there were just so out of left field and dumb and not in line with any canon or character, and it just was not lining up. So let's begin. The last episode had a lot of holes and a lot of things that were just dumb, like I just said. So Harrison shows up in Dexter's life, and the entire time he keeps insisting that Dexter left him because he saw darkness in Harrison, right? That keeps popping up, this theme that, oh, it was me, you saw darkness in me, it's all my fault. And he keeps alluding to a letter Dexter wrote, bringing up at one point that he mentions to Hannah to watch out for any darkness that she may see, using that as proof that there was something in him that Dexter saw and that's why he left. But then when we finally get to hear the letter in full at the very end of the episode, there's absolutely no confusion about why Dexter leaves. He explicitly states that he's leaving because of his own darkness, and that unless she notices any darkness, which is pretty clear that Dexter did not notice any prior to him leaving, that he should remain dead for Harrison. So why does Harrison keep thinking that it's his darkness that is responsible? And why does he think Dexter wouldn't understand when he literally talks about his own darkness that he wrestles within that letter? And also, why did Harrison live in foster care after Hannah died? They sent him to Miami, so they had to know of some familial ties or connection to the place, but no one took him in? Not Aster or Cody? Aster would have been in her early 20s, I think, like maybe 23 or so. And I am pretty sure Cody would be in high school still, or maybe just freshly graduated. So where is he living? Could Harrison not join them? I don't know. It seems like they could have at least mentioned them, but no mention of them is made at all, which it in of itself is pretty lame. But, like, why did he go to foster care? Like, they could have just had to throw away they couldn't have me, or the grandparents passed away and Harrison just didn't have the connection with him, or they couldn't take care of him. I don't know. Whatever. Simple explanation or mention of them would have been nice. I would have loved to see them in it, but whatever. I'll take it if they just mention it, but they didn't. Okay, so my cat's going nuts right now, but I'll just continue going. And if you hear a cat chirping and running around, just know he's a maniac. All right, so let's dive into the crapshoot that is the last episode. And it all kicks off because, for whatever reason, Angela decides that because Dexter lied about who he was, it must be because he is a serial killer that everyone thought was somebody else. I get being like, dang, that's huge. Maybe we should take a break or a moment because that's a huge thing to lie about and whatever. But his story is super believable. So why jump to, oh, you're a bad person, instead of just, okay, I need some time because that's a lot to, take in. And she meets Batista, who credited him with helping to catch killers. It didn't say anything bad about him. Didn't have, oh, but he always kind of gave me some weird vibes, or, oh, I think this might have actually been the case with him. So why did she jump so far? And I'm a bit confused as to why she suspected him to begin with. I think, going back and rewatching some things, I think it all stems from what she learns from Molly. That he had to have recorded their conversation in order to have known where Molly and Kurt were going, or have heard what they said to each other at all. But at this point, she knows he has a background in police work, in forensics, so it could have easily been explained why he had been trying to gain more information. Maybe Dexter had those same feelings of hesitation that Angela did about Kurt. But then, when she finds out he beat up the drug dealer who sold the drugs Harrison OD'd on, she then immediately goes to talk to the dude to get the whole story? What makes her go from he fled his old life, told a very reasonable and convincing story about why he'd fake his death, to he must be some murderer or something, and that's why he's attacking these random people instead of just an upset father? I'm just confused as to what made her dig more. Maybe it's the cop in her, but it still just doesn't feel like it makes a lot of sense. I don't know. But then she takes this random guy's word, the drug dealer, for Dexter just stabbing him in the neck? That could have happened anywhere. At any time. He could just be yanking her chain. But then she finds out that the guy who made the drugs OD'd and just thinks, oh, well, that solves that. Dexter must have tried to kill both of them. Then finds out it was ketamine in both of their system and Googles ketamine Miami homicide. And the first thing that pops up is the Bay Harbor Butcher? Okay, let's break this down. First, that's the first thing that would pop up? You telling me that ketamine wasn't used in any murders ever in Miami, except for the one time with the Bay Harbor Butcher? No. No way. Which also brings me to the second item. The Bay Harbor Butcher, aka Dexter, never used ketamine to knock his victims out. He even states this in the very first episode when he gets the ketamine. When he says that M99 can't easily be accessed, so he'll have to do with the ketamine from the vet instead. And the third point was that Miami Metro Homicide and the FBI had absolutely no idea what drug was used for the victims because Dexter destroyed the cooling unit in the tent with all the bodies and destroyed their chances of finding out what the drug that was used. So they didn't know. They knew that he drugged the victims. They assumed because of the needle mark. But they never made a connection to what they used, let alone the wrong drug of ketamine. But fine. Let's say they're retconning Dexter and they knew what drug he used. And the drug that he used was ketamine instead. And let's forget that they explicitly stated in the first episode that it's a different drug. We're supposed to then believe that Angela thinks these two guys who do drugs and have needle marks in their necks with ketamine in their system must mean that Dexter was the Bay Harbor Butcher. Even though neither victim has been dismembered, one of which is alive, but, whatever. Neither had any plastic wrap about them. The only thing they had in common was that they were criminals, though I don't think murderers? And I can't recall if that connection was made for sure in the original Dexter, but I think they knew it was specifically murderers that he went after. Or, attempted, accused, whatever. Not 100% positive, but even then, the only other thing that connected them was that they had needle marks in their necks. Which I guess people who do drugs probably aren't sticking it into their own necks, but is there really not a single other murderer, or serial or otherwise, who has stuck a needle in a person's neck? So even if we ignore the huge plot hole of ketamine, it still seems insane that she would make those connections. I mean, if you want there to be a solid connection, have Dexter be interrupted while killing the drug maker and have to flee. Have an arm hacked off with plastic all around. There's your link. Not a flimsy needle mark and a drug that he used that he didn't use. And then that they didn't know he used or didn't use, whatever. Have a more solid link and not something that floats on a plot hole, I guess. Alright, now let's talk about the events that occurred that I still just wish were a hallucination. So Dexter gets arrested by Angela, which, fine, whatever, that's fine, I don't care. We'll pretend it was solid police work and not magical writing that got her to those conclusions. They put Dexter in jail and hold him on barely anything, right? It's not even evidence, circumstantial evidence, if that's the correct term, I think. They found a screw in his burned down home, one that they verified belonged to Matt, the original murder that kicked off this new series. Now, at this point, the police have fairly good reason to suspect Kurt burned down Dexter's house. Let's also remember that Angela believes Kurt killed her friend, is dead set on it, right? But then just lets him go because he says, oh, well, it was my dad. What? That would have to be investigated. That would have to be verified. And even if it was true, he was still aware of important information but never came forward. So couldn't they have just held him longer? So she believes that Kurt killed her friend, has blood to tie him to it that he matches, and that he pretended his son was alive when they tried to search near that area, which could be partially circumstantial evidence as well. But the evidence for Dexter is that there was some note in Angela's mailbox saying it was Dexter, and then they find a screw in the ashes of a home. Again, the same home that they know Kurt is set on fire? How is that more substantial than what they have against Kurt? So how is Dexter still in jail, but Kurt was set free? Or how is that more of a sign that Dexter is in more trouble than Kurt would have been? But whatever. I get it. She has a hunch, so she's going to keep him in custody, which is what she should have done with Kurt, but whatever. But why does Dexter then go nuts? He knows she has nothing. None of that could be proven. Nothing could be linked. There are no ties to him being the Bay Harbor Butcher, and no ties for him murdering anybody else in that town. Especially after he gives her evidence that Kurt is a serial killer. Are they going to take Kurt's word then? And as my brother so nicely put it, it's Occam's razor here. Is it more believable that there are two serial killers in this very small town? Or that there is one serial killer who's trying to frame a guy, the guy that is the boyfriend of a cop who just arrested and humiliated him for a murder that he actually did commit, for murdering his son? Obviously, anybody would believe that this serial killer is trying to set somebody up and make the chief of police look bad all in the same go. There's no way that Dexter's case would go any further than what happened with Kurt. And Kurt was let go. So then Dexter, instead of just playing a super cool until all the alphabet people show up, like the FBI and whatever, to process the scene he just sent Angela to, and then he and Harrison could just slip away in the chaos caused by that. Instead, Dexter decides, oh, I'll just kill this cop who was previously going by the book the entire time until conveniently he's the only officer in the precinct, and then run away. It was so un-Dexter. I mean, we know sometimes his emotions get the best of him. That's literally how the show opens. He snaps and attacks Matt, and realizes what he did and just goes, what the heck, I'll kill him anyway. He kind of probably fit the code anyway, but he's a jerk, so whatever, I'll just kill him. And Dexter's pretty smart, right? I mean, him killing Logan wasn't heat of the moment, that was planned. He apparently decided he had to leave right that second, even though I think it's pretty obvious the FBI would not even for a moment think some small town chief of police thinks some guy is the real Bay Harbor butcher. I mean, we definitely could have seen Dexter fall into a descent of killing to cover things up where things start getting out of hand. Logan's definitely not the first innocent person that he kills to keep his secret. But killing Logan at this time just didn't make any sense. They didn't have to leave town right then, because there was nowhere near enough evidence to convince anybody that Dexter killed anyone. Then, we get the scene where Dexter and Harrison meet up. And oh boy, let's talk about Harrison first. Harrison claims he's not like his dad in this scene, that he was just angry because Dexter left him. Which, sure, maybe that's partly true. He can be angry at that. That's a pretty normal reaction. Even to lash out at others, that's normal. I could even maybe see him breaking that kid's arm during the wrestling match as part of that anger, especially since he had a serial killer, Kurt, basically grooming him before the match. I could see that, sure. But what Harrison does to Ethan? That's not anger that your dad has left you. That's that dark passenger rising up and finding a way to hurt someone without getting caught. He orchestrated that whole thing. And that lines up with Dexter, right? He's intelligent and has a plan. His kills are premeditated. And we know Harrison was really smart because they thought he cheated on his placement exam and had to retake it, where he supposedly scored even higher the second time. Right? And when he finds out about Dexter, what does he do? He wants to join up too. He wants to kill Kurt, the serial killer. He doesn't shy away. The only thing that makes him start shying away is when the blood starts going through him and having flashbacks of when he was a kid, which, again, very Dexter, because that same thing happened to Dexter when he walked into that room that his brother had orchestrated with all blood everywhere that triggered those repressed memories. Harrison is not just some angry teen. Obviously, there's more to what's going on. He may not be exactly like Dexter, as we see him having fun with his friends and being more interested in girls than Dexter ever really appeared to be. You know, like he does seem to have a bit more emotional connection with people, but there's that same darkness in him. And I don't see how the writers or Dexter thought that to help him he needs to shoot and kill his own father. I completely understand Harrison's fresh viewpoint of seeing what Dexter does and seeing that he's become the person he hunts. Right? That all checks out. He learns what his dad does, he thinks he's doing it to save innocence, and then he realizes that that's not saving innocence, you're just killing people. But then that means that Dexter has to be dead and that Harrison has to do it in order for that point to come across? I don't follow that logic at all. Is that even logic? I don't think so. And the thing that probably makes me the most mad is that Dexter says that his son killing him is the first time he's ever felt love. Hold on, I need to take a drink because this is going to be a long speech. Okay, so where was I? The thing that angered me the most. Dexter says that his son killing him is the first time he's ever felt love, and that he's never cared about anybody else before. But that is such freaking baloney. We know Dexter isn't necessarily capable of some of the same emotional range that most people have. And we know that he struggles to find connections. He doesn't quite care about people in the way that most others do, but he has definitely loved and cared for people. That's literally what the entire last season of Dexter the OG is about. The psychiatrist, Dr. Vogel, who created the code for Dexter along with Harry, without ever even meeting Dexter, which is a ridiculous notion that she just took some random dude word for how Dexter behaved and what he was capable of. I thought you couldn't diagnose unless you had the person in front of you. You can't just diagnose somebody based on what someone else's viewpoint of them is. But, take a breath, Kelsey. Different show, different rant. Anyway, Dr. Vogel was constantly surprised by Dexter in that last season. She kept saying that he shouldn't be able to feel that emotion, that the love he had for Deb wasn't really love. She kept trying to tell him what he was feeling, or not feeling, like put excuses to what he's feeling, in a way. But Dexter pushed against that notion. He loved Deb. And yeah, maybe it was different in how other people feel it, but he felt how he felt about her, and he called that love. And that was something that put him apart from most of the serial killers that he would encounter, right? The Trinity killer didn't actually love or care about his family. It was simply a cover, right? They feared him. There was no tenderness. There was no love. There was no affection. There was nothing. He beat them. And the brain surgeon in that last season also didn't really care about Vogel. We were constantly shown that Dexter has some limited range of emotions. He loved Rita, and we saw that in how broken he was after her death. In fact, it was losing her that made him realize he was even capable of love. We finally get to hear him say, "I love you" to people like his kids. He loved Astor and Cody and Harrison. He felt a bond with them. And he loved his sister, right? He finally gets to say, "I love you" to his sister. And Deb is like, "Whoa, you've never said that before." But he loved her very deeply, which is why her death launched him into that guilt spiral that drove him away. He even supposedly loved Hannah, which is, again, different show, different rant. But now we're supposed to believe none of that was real? That the first moment he feels real love is when his son is going to kill him? To, I guess, stop him from turning into what he didn't want to be turned into? That's what he thinks love is? I don't know. Whatever. Also, he definitely cared about people because he saved Molly's life, even though he thought she knew who he was at the time. You saw he cared about people because he had saved others from murders before, like actively saved them, and not just because he killed the serial killer, right? Like that was something that had been brought up a few times, of Harry being like, "You're not here to save them," and then him being like, "Well, free you, Dad," and then going and saving the person anyway. Right? We saw that with Lumen. He didn't kill her even though she saw who he was. She was a victim. And he believed in his code, but he also grew to care about her. He protected her. He tried to help her, right? When they first encounter each other, he kind of kidnaps her and locks her in a room, but gets her like antibiotics and water and is like, "Hey, I'm not trying to hurt you, but I also want to make sure you don't tell anybody about me." So Harrison claiming that he never really cared about saving people and only about murdering people isn't really true. It's something that I think the show played with a lot. Like, is he doing it because he enjoys the killing, or is he kind of have this weird twisted moral code? You see it in how Dexter kills his victims, right? The more heinous they were, the more upset he was when he killed them. Or when they killed someone he cared about, it became more than just doing what was right in his code. He developed a kind of, he developed feelings. And he channeled those feelings in the way he was taught, which was to kill people through the code. The whole last season of Dexter also shows us that Harry and Dr. Vogel weren't really right in teaching him the code. He could have been fine if they did actual therapy. That in this case, nature versus nurture was very important. So I also thought it was a bit weird that Dexter so quickly jumped to teaching Harrison the code. They went to one therapy session, because Harrison was supposed to go to another and never went, and then they went together and decided, well, guess that won't work because neither of us really opened up. Well, I guess Harrison maybe kind of opened up a little bit. So I guess it didn't work, so I guess we'll just continue to be murderers, even though Dexter had fled that life and went away for 9 years without feeling the need to kill anybody. But sure, we'll just jump right back in because Harrison has some dark tendencies. And I learned nothing from that last season of Dexter. Anyway, so Harrison shoots Dexter, right? Kills him. And then Angela just covers it up? For someone who apparently hates lies and murderers, she sure was quick to cover it up. And that doesn't even really make any sense. Why does Harrison need it to be covered up? They could have easily claimed self-defense. Dexter just killed a cop, and Harrison could have said he feared for his life and shot him. At first I thought she was just telling him, hey, get out of here so I don't have to arrest you, or, bring you in immediately for questioning. Maybe even telling him to skip town because she didn't want him to have to deal with all that. But then she wipes down his weapon and claims she was the one who shot him? What? Wouldn't they realize the bullet wasn't from her gun, but from the rifle? A rifle that belonged to Harrison and now has no fingerprints and was wiped down? Although, now as I say this, maybe she was wiping the muzzle down to get the gunshot residue on her? But then it still wouldn't be on her hands. So it still doesn't make any sense. And now the FBI is going to be all over, and she's going to have to explain why she killed her ex-boyfriend, and why there aren't any fingerprints on the gun that was used to kill him. And why she didn't use her own sidearm. And why did she have her boyfriend's son's gun? So many questions raised when they could have just been like, yeah, he killed him because he had just killed a cop and had blood all over his face. And much like Game of Thrones, I'm not really upset again at the ending. Like, I'm not upset that Dexter dies at the end. Not even necessarily that his son is the one that kills him. And I'm certainly not upset that Dexter goes too far and kills an innocent, because again, we've seen that happen before. I'm just annoyed at how it all happened. I get we were never supposed to be on Dexter's side, right? It's something that the series has done really well, making us believe in Dexter, root for him. We don't want him to get caught. We want him to keep on doing what he's doing. But he's not a good guy. He's not righteous or moral or what other adjective you want to use there. He's a serial killer. He just so happens to choose victims who would get the death penalty if they were caught, which made sense in Florida since they had the death penalty, and makes less sense in New York where they don't. But he's not perfect, right? He's killed innocents before. He killed a man, that photographer in, I can't even remember what season that was, but that one photographer who didn't actually kill anyone and he thought he killed him, didn't really have any evidence, which was pretty sloppy of Dexter, that it was that guy that killed him and ended up being like the assistant that killed him instead, and that completely messed him up. And then he killed Miguel's brother, who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time and hadn't actually killed anyone, though it may be argued he was about to. And he killed LaGuerta to cover for himself, right? That was one of the most controversial ones, right? This completely innocent woman who just happened to be onto him. Well, not completely innocent. LaGuerta was kind of a terrible person herself. And he also killed that dumb NA sponsor, and I don't think she killed anyone technically, although she did attempt to kill him and his children, so that was more, again, him caring that, his children were about to get murdered, and him being upset and going and killing her, right? Like, he freaking went to a different country to track her down and murder her because he was so upset that his children almost died. Because at that point, they were his kids, right? But anyway, with all that said, wouldn't it have been better if we see him get caught? To see that same debate that we have as viewers play out on the screen? Where people are rooting for him or rooting against him. The line for morality gets drawn somewhere, and wouldn't it be cool to see where it gets drawn? On who falls on which side? I wouldn't even hate it if he ends up getting killed while he's trying to kill somebody by a cop, even if that cop was Angela. But Harrison killing him because he's not like him, and they're trying to use this to say that that's going to help him lead a normal life or some baloney, not buying it. I did like that Angel Batista was brought in. That was a nice inclusion. And it felt fairly believable in how they did it, and it was nice to have a little more of the original cast pop in. But what was the folder about at the end? I get maybe him having doubts about Dokes being the Bay Harbor Butcher, right? Like maybe they've just kind of always been there under the surface. But why did he have a folder with Maria LaGuerta on it? And why did they make it seem like him learning Dexter was alive wasn't good news, that his friend was alive, but further proof that Dokes wasn't the killer? Maybe this will all be mentioned in the next season, but right now I don't know about it. I'm really confused. Asa, my brother, had a good point that maybe the file was actually LaGuardia's murder case, and then I was looking more into that, and that's maybe what brought up some of this, Bay Harbor Butcher stuff. And I think maybe it could be that he was looking into Deb's death and her random disappearance of her body, because remember Dexter took it and threw it out in the ocean? Maybe looking more into her death and her missing body dug up more and more stuff, and maybe that is what led to LaGuardia's case. I'm not sure. It seemed a bit messy, and I just don't even know at this point. So, would I recommend this new series of Dexter, New Blood? I honestly don't know. I really loved and was enjoying the show. I thought it had great potential. But once again, the writers just kill it in the finale. Asa did say there is going to be a season 2 for sure. Of course I'm going to watch it. Of course. I mean, I hate myself, so of course I'll continue to put myself through pain and agony. But I have so many questions, and I need those answers. And hopefully season 2 can help with those. But I guess we'll see. My hopes have definitely been dashed, and my expectations have been lowered. And there you have it. Those are my thoughts on Dexter New Blood. Thank you so much for joining me and allowing me to vent a lot. Sorry for this incredibly long episode, but you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Mixed Media Reviews Podcast, and you can also find me anywhere you find your podcasts, as long as that is Anchor, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Breaker, or Radio Public. Please join me next week where I will be reviewing a movie. I'm not sure what movie, since I did have a whole Avatar thing planned, but now I'll have to do something else because I just couldn't not talk about Dexter. Maybe I'll watch Encanto or some other popular movie and throw that in next week as a little placeholder until I can get back on the Avatar train. But if you have any suggestions, please let me know, and maybe I'll do those. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye!